missing from Drawdown today that I think really need to be in the conversation.
Okay, but we're going live. So,
yeah, there are other things.
There are a few things missing.
Yeah, indigenous, yeah.
Folks, hold it. Let me introduce you, because I want to say hello to our guests, our listeners, our viewers. So, good evening. I'm Metta Spencer, here in Toronto, as usual, on Monday nights. I'm glad you're with us, because we're going to have some fun tonight. We have three people who are going to talk about what I think is the most interesting and important book. Well, interesting, no, you don't read it like for fun, but you read the book Drawdown to really get inspired to do something about saving the world from global warming. So we have this wonderful book by Paul Hawken and what is his colleague's name? Somebody will correct me in a moment. Two guys edited this book, and we're going to have a discussion primarily about the book. Of course, we're really talking about global warming in general, but there's this special book that's very, very important that we want to focus on tonight. So my guests are, first I'll introduce Liz Couture, who is lurking in the shadows there, and Liz, would you wave and say hello, please?
Hello, everyone.
Good. Liz is a piano teacher, and but she says she's taking off the summer. She's not going to teach piano this summer. So, very much. Anyway, so she is somebody who has cooperated with David Burman in giving workshops on the Drawdown project. David, say hello. David, wave and
hello.
Say
hello.
This is David Burman, whom I've known several years now. David is a part-time, I guess, dentist. He's a dentist with a great deal of interest and background in indigenous societies and indigenous health issues. But he's also into every kind of spiritual development kind of movement that you can come into in the peace movement. So I'm not doing a very good job of introducing you, David, but you'll take care of yourself, I'm sure. And here we have Peter Jones, who's a new friend. Peter Jones is an American peace activist who apparently was working on electoral reform issues and did not make himself popular with certain elements of politics in the U.S., and has come to Canada as an expatriate, now living in Canada and teaching. He's a professor of design at OCAD-U, which is Ontario College of Arts and Design University. Is that it? And has been here a couple of years. Now, one of the interesting things that Peter has been doing is he's taken the initiative to organize a major conference, which will take place here in September, it's the Conference of the World Beyond War movement, which is a very major movement in the US, but they're coming to Toronto, and he's going to host it at OCAD in September. So you may want to mark that on your date book that you want to attend that. It's going to be very
International Peace Day, September 21st and 22nd.
Good.
So there will be peace marches, and we'll be hosting the World Beyond War, Designing a World for Peace conference on the 21st and 22nd. And I've been working with Unify Toronto and with David Burman for a number of years, and in co-creating the annual series of workshops. And so the Drawdown program is our major series this year.
Excellent. Okay, so now that I have given such a glowing recommendation, we need to share a little bit about what this drawdown business is all about. Peter, you have the floor now. Why don't you begin explaining it, and then I'm sure David has his own way of explaining what it's about.
Well, let's start with what the drawdown is, what it means. So the idea the term drawdown is used by Paul Hawken and by the book and the program behind Paul Hawken's analysis of the top 100 solutions that would comprehensively and together reduce and reverse the impacts of the climate impacts of environmental degradation by addressing the top 100 most impactful solutions based on the scientific literature. And so the effects of this would show by through the period of 2020 to 2050, they have done the system modeling with most of these, if not, I mean, not all of them have been modeled, but they've all been scientifically assessed, that these 100 solutions, if together, would actually show a net drawing down of gigatons of greenhouse gas to a net effect of removing carbon from the atmosphere to a significant extent, so that by 2050 we could see not just within our own regions of Canada and North America, but start to see on a global basis, because this is a planetary problem, that we would see a drawing down of greenhouse gases and reversal of climate effects.
Mm-hmm. David, yeah, what do you have to add to that as a way of?
Well, I think the way Paul describes his process was that in the early 2000s, with the process of the intergovernmental process of climate change, the effects of climate change were irrefutable. But when he started asking, well, so now what should we do? The answers were, well, change your light bulbs, drive less, and he surmised that if that's what the results were, then we're finished. So he put together a team of volunteer researchers. He had no money, but he does have a great reach. He's a well-known journalist. He's written a lot of influential books on the environment. And
can I interrupt you a second, because I couldn't think of the co-author or the co-editor's name, but I know that it's the Moneybags guy who is leading the campaign to get Trump impeached.
Well, you know
that guy? What's his name?
I don't know who is the money.
On the cover of the book, it'll have the name of two people, and Paul Hawken.
No, the cover is just Reversible Roaming, edited by Paul Hawken.
And who else?
And no and.
There's a Dyer or something like that. Okay, well.
There's this whole page of staff here, and research fellows, essayists, board of directors. No co-author. No, there's senior writers.
No, the one I'm thinking of. I'm sorry, I derailed you. I'm
right.
I don't have the book in front of me.
Copy editor, writing assistant, research director.
You see him on the TV all the time. He's the one on CNN, for example. He'll come up and say, "We have to impeach Trump." And
no, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't have TV, so I don't know.
Oh, well, anyway,
anyway, so regardless, Paul put together this team of volunteer researchers. So PhDs, grad students from around the world in a wide array of disciplines, the arts, philosophy, geoengineering, everything. And then they looked at the possibilities for global warming and reversal thereof, and analyze them. It's okay, how much carbon can we expect to pull out of the atmosphere? Because just slowing down the rate of emissions isn't going to do it. And how much is it going to cost? And what can we expect to save by implementing this? And the good news is that altogether, the cost is about half of what we'd save. So if people who are whining on about it's going to be too expensive, we can't afford it. Actually, if anyone who ever buys insurance knows that you don't mind paying premiums for possible catastrophic result. and this is no different. So anyway, I'll shut up there, but give Liz a chance.
Yeah, actually, the beauty of it is one of the beauties is the fact that you save money instead of being out of pocket altogether. Although there is at least one thing that is a major expenditure that you can't recoup, but we can talk about that later. Liz, by the way, I should have told you, is quite an environmentalist and has run for the Green Party for. When did you do that, Liz?
That would have been 2007. Provincially, I ran.
Okay, well, next time we'll walk around putting plants of signs on people's lawns and getting out more votes for you. I want a chance to vote for you. Okay, Liz, tell us, how did you get into this? How did you come to discover this interesting project, Drawdown?
I've been involved with a group called Citizens Climate Lobby, which has chapters all over the US and Canada. And a number of months ago, the video of Paul Hawken and the introduction of the Drawdown book was the feature of the monthly meeting. And then it went sort of to the back of my mind until the Toronto chapter, led by John and Satya, in association with Unify Toronto and their other association, Pachamama Alliance, came to my attention. So I went to the meeting. I went with my partner and with my nephew, and I found myself to be quite emotional at the introduction to Drawdown. I was emotional because I knew the seriousness of the issues, but I was also hopeful, which is what Paul Hawken wanted us to feel, because the numbers have been put to the solutions. And so when the numbers are there and there's a possibility of making it happen and drawing down our emissions and reversing global warming, then I can't help but say, what can I do? How can I be involved? And so I got a copy of the book at that introduction. And then, of course, David and I teamed up and met you through your Science for Peace organization. And we spoke about it. And then since then, we've been doing we're doing 7 summits, 7 sector summits based on the 7 sectors outlined in the Drawdown book. For example, the energy sector, the transportation sector, and so on, the agriculture sector. And we're about to do our 3rd sector summit in Toronto.
Tell me what a summit is in this context.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Tell me what a summit is. Today is the day when Putin and Trump have been holding a summit. And I hope you don't mean that you're going to meet Putin in Helsinki.
Yes, we're going to Helsinki for our summit.
No, the summit is just simply, I guess, the term used. We bring together people through our networks. They come in, we get some speakers on the particular subject, whoever we can manage to get. And then we have breakout sessions so people can share. And the idea is to gather the information and then, I guess as a group, just decide what we want to do with it. So for example, after the food sector summit, which was the first one, we came up
that you organized, by the way.
I was a big part of organizing it. We found out that Toronto is preparing a food policy beginning in 2019, and they're very interested in having us submit our ideas to them. So, as a result of getting some grassroots involvement, we might be able to influence their policy. So a summit is really just a gathering of people.
Okay, but now what is this thing that the Toronto people are going to do? A food what? What is the plan? Is it influence the food that Torontonians eat, or?
Well, the Toronto Food Policy Council has been in existence since the 1980s, and it's a creature of the Toronto Public Health. And the director of the Toronto Food Policy Council is the one bureaucrat that's actually paid to criticize the government. And so Wayne Roberts he's recently retired, but was a very influential guy. He calls himself a solutionary.
Okay, good.
Because that's what he does. He offers solutions. He doesn't offer critique. He offers solutions.
Okay,
So,
well, what are the main things that we need to do about food, and how much difference will it make if we change our food habits? I presume that's what's being suggested here.
Well, the number one,
we can stop wasting it. Sorry, Liz.
Yeah, I was just going to say, that's exactly what I was going to say. Is just the wasting of food, and it's interesting. The waste of food it manifests itself differently in countries like ours versus third world countries. I shouldn't call it third world. Let me use the politically correct term. Call it the developing country. So in the developing countries, they might have issues with refrigeration or getting their food to market on time. Maybe they have transportation issues. We here probably have buy too much and don't use it. Or restaurants or grocery stores, they try to keep their shelves nicely filled, and maybe they don't get to sell all their produce, and so it gets thrown away.
So are there simple structural changes that could be made in the way we handle things on a mass scale that would make a real difference in the amount of, frankly, when you tell me I shouldn't waste food, yes, that means I should go look at that green stuff that's growing in the back of my refrigerator, which I can't reach so easily. It's been here. But I don't think that's really going to make much difference in global warming. What is there that we could do that would change the actual way we handle and process and distribute food that would reduce the amount of wastage? Is there anything being suggested that will be novel and different? Or are we just appealing to people much as, David made this joke about turning off the light bulbs. Yeah, that would help, but we got to have bigger plans than that.
Well, there are a lot of things that can be done, I guess, and Drawdown is really opening the possibility for people to explore that in the different regions or the different kind of coalitions that might be brought together within the summits. I think you had maybe accidentally thrown the word simple in there, or there's simple structural things. I think some of the more massive changes need to take into account that the food supply system and the supply chains, the food, are not consistent with the food webs at all, and that we have an industrial food system that produces waste as part of the system. And so changing that system, it took many years to get to that point. It has a lot of momentum. In fact, and I think this is a good example to use across all of the Drawdown kind of solution areas, is that if we look at them too much in isolation, even though these are fairly big, like, energy systems and food systems, they're all reforesting, changing agriculture, they are all interconnected, and they all have different, and they've all been industrialized, and that there's a lot of momentum behind that. It's going to be, we need to find solutions that really change at the level of changing, not just ways of life, but those industrialized systems.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when you think that half of food doesn't leave the farm because it's not pretty enough, because it's not uniform enough, because it's not marketable enough to the way the consumer has been trained to think that food is supposed to look, never mind taste, then you've got this terrible waste built right into the system of production, and so that has to change. Now,
shipping contracts are set up, sometimes years in advance. So we get all our avocados from Mexico and our grapes from Chile or whatever, because we have to rely on these constant sources. And we've actually made that less expensive in some ways than growing and providing those same foods from within not just really 100 miles, which is really hard to do, but let's say 500 miles anyway from the US or something, but we're shipping food everywhere around the world, and that certainly has a huge impact. So this is what I mean about the industrial system. Everywhere we look, we're using more fossil fuels for the diesel engines of the container ships and the packing and unpacking and the packaging, and then so all of that is, so much of that leads to waste. It's unimaginable how much waste.
Yeah, there's that, and then of course the food that gets thrown out of supermarkets, as Metta said, because it doesn't get purchased on time, and so France, I think, has banned that practice of throwing out usable food from supermarkets. It has to go to a source that needs it, whether or not they can afford to buy it. And so that's another real issue: is what do we do with food that would be thrown out? It's perfectly usable, and meanwhile people are hungry. So these are two incompatible situations. So
what about using it for food banks?
Well, that's exactly it. Not food banks, but so much as food distribution. So there are organizations that take food that's sort of a few days past its so-called best buy date and actually prepare food for people who need it. So sort of a modern version of soup kitchen, I suppose, but it's actually providing food, delicious, prepared by known chefs to create good food for people. It can be done through restaurants. It can be done many ways. There's actually an organization, and I just read about it in The Guardian, but a few days before that, I'd seen it up on the junction on Dundas Street. It's called Feed It Forward. And they get food, they stock their food from supermarkets, from distributors, and they give it away. And if you have money to pay for it, that's great. But their objective is to give away the food that's on their fully stocked shelves. So people can go into the shop. It's like a grocery store, like a supermarket. They can buy whatever they want, and they can pay whatever they want for it. Okay. And the idea is food security, but it's also getting rid of a huge amount of potential waste. So these are socially active ways that can influence the corporate system.
There really are 1,000 ways, maybe more, of dealing with not wasting food. And the first step is to educate people. And I think a lot of people already know this issue. It's been discussed for a long time. But, as long as people know about it, then they're aware that, if they're not wasting food, then they're actually making a contribution to helping with climate change in a small way. But if everybody makes that kind of a contribution, then it does add up. Yeah. But there's just one more thing, in addition to my comment saying there's 1,000 ways, we had the most interesting speaker at our food summit, and he was representing a company called Feedback App, and they produced an app that allowed customers in non-prime time restaurant eating hours to connect with this app and connect with restaurants who otherwise would have thrown the food away. And so, they get it at a discount and they get it off hours. And it's a win-win situation because the restaurant can get rid of it and the patrons can have the food. So, this is something that, we can all encourage and look into and make use of.
It sounds absolutely great, but I wonder if you do it on a large scale enough to actually make a difference in the quantity of food being moved around, wouldn't it ruin the market? I mean, grocers are not going to want to give away food that otherwise people would come and buy from them instead.
Yes, I think we're dealing with something very fundamental here, and that is how the market, how capitalism has organized itself around food. And I think what we're talking about is quite subversive, actually. which so there'll be some blowback. I think what we're talking about really is changing popular culture. I think the only way you're going to shift these huge vested interests is through a massive change of what people perceive as normal. We've seen it with gay marriage within a very short time. It was like from what to so what in about 5 years, and that and I think it's possible in other ways.
Plastic straw campaign, which went from this is a problem to eliminating plastic straws in San Francisco and other large cities across restaurants. Something that my partner and I have talked about, like every time we get a plastic straw and somebody did something about it, and just that intervention, what that does is it reminds people that there's a change in values. And with food, I would say one of the things, it's not just popular culture, because I think there are a lot of different things that can shift there and then they will add up. But big changes can be made fairly easily by institutional buyers. And so there's one of my former graduate students has developed a program called Nourish within healthcare institutional food purchasing. And they have been successful in this program to create a community of practice to educate and then develop kind of a series of new practices for shifting their purchase of institutional food from the Cisco and Nestle and the other large providers to regional coalitions and regional providers that before fell under the $100,000 bulk limit. What they do is encourage them to pool and to provide different ways of purchasing healthy, qualified, and regional food, and bringing organic. Starting to bring organic isn't so important with this. It can actually be a lot more expensive, but regionally produced and locally produced sources within healthcare and institutional buyers. This could be done through government, in the military, and in other large institutional buyers, where if they're convinced that it's going to be a savings and be good, they're also looking for ways that they can contribute. It isn't like the military is actually a climate change denier. They actually, in the U.S. military, has actually declared that climate change is the biggest threat to planetary existence in our lifetimes. So they're very aware of the effects of this. So,
yeah, another local example of that is Local Food Plus, which was started by Mike Schreiner and Laurie Stahlbrand and Rod McRae, where they organized institutional buyers in Toronto, the first one being the University of Toronto, to source their food locally, so that they would source local farmers to supply hotel chains and large academic institutions, which use a huge amount of food. So these are examples. Of course, the other part, it's not just food distribution, but switching to a plant-rich diet. So switching from over-reliance on meat to more vegetables requires more local production, vegetable production, less land use for meat production, getting rid of the huge feedlots, which are hugely polluting, and not to mention smelly, and not to mention terribly cruel to animals, to more humane practice. One of the things I like about Hawkins' approach, amongst many, is that it's these are things we'd want to do anyway. This is not about hardship. This is about doing making the kind of world we want to live in. That's more humane, more livable, more breathable, more playable, more fun to be in, and the bonus is we get to draw down carbon. So I think that's rather nice.
Now, the question now for me is how much of this this emphasis on veganism or vegetarianism is a health concern, and how much of it is motivated by, and how much about the climate change issue, because Facebook a day or two ago, I got a thing showing that this stuff about creating meat in vats, you start with stem cells and grow these things in culture and stuff, that this kind of meat is real meat, but it's never in a live animal. And apparently it's going to be available in stores in just a few years.
Right.
They're coming along with it very quickly. That should mean that all of these pastures with animals will be, and the inhumane practices that you're concerned about, all of that will go away. How much difference would it make if we got all our meat, let's say, from vats instead of live animals and slaughterhouses?
Well, you really need to have a balanced diet. You can't be eating meat all the time. And nutritionists will tell you that eating too much meat produces acidity in your blood, which produces arthritis and all kinds of other problems. And so either way, you want to have a balance. And the plant-based diets give you a better nutrition because of the way they're grown. So personally, I think it would take me a long time to get used to the idea of even eating meat from specially grown in a vat. But then, you know what? Decades ago, people would never have thought of eating, beef liver or something, because it took some marketing campaigns to make that happen. So people can change, but it's got to be a balanced diet either way. So with going a little bit more vegetarian than normal, it's a win-win situation.
Actually, I don't want to disagree with you, but I do, because there's a Dr. Jha who gave a lecture in the same series that you gave, where you gave your talk about Drawdown at U of T last year. I had him give a talk. He's an epidemiologist, and he's from India, but he's doing a huge study of 1 million households in India, and looking at the way that people die, what they die of, and how long they live, and the conditions of their their lifestyle and so on. And he compared, and India is a great place to study vegetarianism, because large numbers of Indians, of course, are lifelong vegetarians. And so you really have a long period of a large group of people who've been vegetarians always, and you can compare them to people who are non-vegetarians. And it turns out that for the most part, there's no difference, that vegetarians live just as long as non-vegetarians, if and you can control for other things to make sure that there's no spurious effect there. But the exception is women, because women vegetarians, turns out, live less long than meat-eating women. Yeah. And the explanation is, it has to do with the culture of India. He thinks that it would not be the case in every society, because the culture is where the women there feed the men and the children first, and whatever is left over, they eat. Therefore, they don't get the kind of balanced diet they should. The women are deprived nutritionally. And therefore, women do not, vegetarian women suffer.
Yeah, but that's a gender issue, though, more than a nutritional one. I think. Actually, I can't wait for fish protein to be manufactured, because then we could get our sushi without mining the oceans for tuna. Right. And we're quickly depleting the oceans of large fish. 90% of large fish in the ocean are gone.
That's right.
And this is a very serious thing with acidification from the absorption of carbon into the ocean, the disruption of the exoskeletons of the zooplankton, which is the basis of much of the food chain of the ocean. The global ocean is in serious trouble. And we know more about the surface of Mars than we know about the ocean. And that is a serious danger to not only human, but all of life.
Well,
So,
So, David, what do you think of the way that Drawdown is dealing with oceans and water issues? I mean, because that's one of the, it's a, it's a very containing kind of area, and the Drawdown solutions are kind of broken out into sectors and different solution areas.
yeah,
And so there's perhaps some crossover, but there's no kind of whole system approach in Drawdown to deal with the relationships with water and the ocean,
yeah,
as whole entities, I guess.
yeah. I know that's one of my issues with Drawdown is by putting it into sectors, which I mean it's necessary in a certain way, and that because that's how the peer-reviewed research is organized, but you need a much more holistic view, I think. Like the oceans, that's why I keep pumping about an indigenous worldview of reciprocity with the earth, and the earth as a whole is our mother, that we're related to basically every atom on earth. Because
sorry,
go ahead.
Paul Hawken makes no apologies for the fact that he doesn't cover every single solution to every possible environmental and ecological problem. With the people he was working with and the resources he had available, he put together 100 solutions. And according to his numbers, if all of these solutions were implemented in the way that he's described with the numbers that he's given, and it's no small task, and he admits that it's a big job, but his goal is to show that global emissions can come down, start reversing in 2050. So, if you want to talk about oceans, there's lots of people who write about that. Lana Mitchell wrote Seasick a number of years ago. That got me thinking about water issues. So
that's where I'm bringing my stuff from. Yeah, that's that.
Yeah.
Now another thing I like about global warming, in fact, about Drawdown, is, and this is where Hawken I think shines, is it goes from it's too late, there's nothing we can do about it, to is it game over or is it game on? And he's saying, okay, the odds are long, no guarantees, but it's possible. So let's do it. So it's from game over to game on, from depression to activism.
And it's interesting too.
Go ahead.
Sorry. It's interesting too. The book itself was a bestseller in 2010. I'm getting a low battery here, so I'm just going to plug in.
It was actually
2017.
2017, just last April. Yeah, a year ago, April.
Right.
Yeah, the Drawdown was launched, and well, I'd have to say, the idea that this can be a way to engage people, and kind of a huge challenge of our lifetimes, is a significant way to reframe how we might involve ourselves as citizens, and how we participate with our families, and with the types of expertise we can bring together. We have one of the big mindset changes. I noticed some of in the advisors, you have people like Joanna Macy and John Elkington. There's some amazing advisors who I know are really seeing things holistically, and are bringing different kind of methods together to this. So I realized that, this is in the first really iterations of its rollout. But if it's going to be a big, a life-changing, culture-changing, planetary-changing, massive movement that gets beyond even what its name is, I think one of the most transformative things might be that it's a movement not to that doesn't deal with the politics of things, which creates division, but is oriented towards discovering solutions in everything from our everyday practices, in our work, in our institutions, in our communities, in the municipalities. That is, you can also take our own level of our own interests and engagement to the town halls, to the community planning, and for those that have access to higher levels, like I would through I'm working on the Mississauga Climate Change Action Plan with the City of Mississauga and a large planning firm, and I'm starting to promote these ideas and looking at Drawdown as a way to engage perhaps Mississauga or the people in the community of Mississauga as a bottom-up civic engagement that could actually meet the planning of the city, in the middle over a number of years. I mean, it isn't there yet, but we've gone from Caledon to Toronto, and and I could certainly see creating these types of if it's fun and meaningful and people are finding ways to engage, and we've discovered how to how to inspire people and to generate and catalyze a different type of movement that isn't about finding everybody wrong. It isn't about impeaching politicians and things and finding how bad things are, but actually we recognize that we're responsible for participating in the world and the culture in this way as well. And it isn't just about changing light bulbs, but about really a lot of things that we can do, and starting to think more holistically about how we can engage in a very big game. And so, but I think for a lot of people, the challenge really, for any type of movement like this, and I think with the climate and environmental movements, it's one of the problems has been is the ideology that has created an us versus them kind of, this is our movement, on the other side, so you're bad or you're a denier. And this has come out of the box being embracing and inclusive and finding ways to engage everybody. And we talk about things like refrigerant, is number one. Well, a lot of people that work in HVAC, you don't think of as, environmentalists, and we need to get them involved.
I want you to exactly mention that. I was wondering when anybody was going to get around to talking about refrigerants. I think that is such an important and interesting thing. Would somebody please explain why number one in the whole list of things that we can do that will actually be effective, why number one has to do with refrigeration?
Well, because the HCFCs that were developed to replace the CFCs in the Montreal Protocol, the chlorhydrocarbons that were a huge cause of the breakdown of the ozone layer, were replaced by hydrochlorofluorocarbons, HCFCs, and then they discovered that HCFCs are actually 1,000 times more powerful greenhouse gases than CO2. So every leak of your air conditioner, of your refrigerator, manufacturer, storage, all these things are producing this huge, even though the actual volume might be small, but the effect is huge. Now, that's one thing that isn't a bottom-up solution. That's something that's happening right now in the industry, finding replacements for HCFCs. So that your HVAC people.
I'm troubled by that, because although they're going to start replacing the coolants pretty soon with some other alternative kind of coolant, which apparently isn't as effective, but that's not what bothers me. It's the fact that there's no effort to try to reclaim the stuff, the coolants in existing refrigeration and air conditioners and refrigerators. I think we ought to have a rule that anytime the truck comes to deliver a new fridge to your house or an air conditioner, the same truck will have to take the old fridge away and take it to a place where there will be specialists who'll be able to take that stuff out. Otherwise, it's going to go to the city dump. And a lot of it leaks anyway. Apparently, there's huge amount of leakage. So it isn't just I think it's going to be several years before the manufacturers start using this new coolant. I've been told that that just changing to and getting rid of this problem with the refrigeration coolants can make one full degree of difference, 1 degree of difference in global warming.
Yeah.
It's really, really important. And I don't
Yeah.
see effort. And in fact, I wanted to find somebody who's an expert on this to interview them for this kind of program, you know, one of the Monday night things. I can't find anybody who's a specialist. I've called around the university who's an engineering professor who knows something about refrigeration. I can't find anybody. I want to interview somebody about this because it's really important.
Well, that's a really good point. That this is an area where we need to really be aware and pushing on a massive scale. This is the kind of thing that social media can push, embarrassing engineers into saying, "Ooh, I guess we should do something." Yeah, that's a very good point.
Another thing I would like you to talk about what this book doesn't cover. You know, it is such a marvelous contribution, but it doesn't cover everything. And one of the things that I know it doesn't cover is war. I saw an interview with Paul Hawken 6 or 8 months ago, maybe a year ago, where the guy said, "Is there anything you couldn't cover in the book?" And he said, "Yes, war." He said, "We don't have sufficient numbers to do the same kind of calculations we need to do with the other interventions that we're promoting." So he didn't even try to do it. But will you please talk about it? He said it's very important. The emission of CO2 and from military, you know, from tanks and planes and what else?
Well, I think it's that it isn't that they don't have the numbers, it's that they're not publicly produced. So his research team wouldn't be able to find research articles that were peer reviewed to support that. You would actually have to go to like freedom of information requests and to the different branches of the military. I mean, you don't have to actually size up the entire impact of the military industrial complex or of the United States Department of Defense or even Canadian Defense. You could actually start with one entity and with the forces in that entity. So Canadian forces or the DoD. And just, I think, if you could quantify through purchase agreements, the amount of fossil fuels, jet fuel, gasoline, and oils that are purchased and consumed, and you could set a threshold for appropriate use. You'd say if between now and 2050, we cut back on aggression, which is essentially what war games are when we get 300,000, or we get hundreds of thousands of people, as were recently done in the Saber Strike war games with NATO. You never hear anybody pushing back to the foreign minister about why is Canada so gung-ho about pushing for big NATO war games in the North Atlantic when there really isn't any type of impending attack. It's just saber rattling. These are hugely expensive and wasteful exercises that are meant just to really showcase capabilities and how badass and threatening Canada is. Instead, we're not taking any type of moral stance. And if we did, we could quantify just fairly easily in purchase records how much annually we're using in the cost of maintaining this approach to a military, which is basically used for corporate show. I mean, we're not defending Canada. UNES is not defending its territory. It's defending its 1,000 bases around the world. So you could run models based on a target scenarios, and you could say a best scenario, a mid-case scenario, and what if we just had a little impact scenario, not a worst case, just a first stage impact. It would have huge effect. And if we could even make the case on just that stage 1 scenario, people might realize just how wasteful, not even counting the manufacture of the bombs and the dropping of tens of thousands of bombs a day under the U.S. global war on terror and things. So,
I think that is actually
uranium depletion.
as strong an argument as any other for reduction of militarism, that we should demand that every country cut back on its military, cut way back on its military, and then look for other sources of security, like United Nations Emergency Peace Service or something that could come and defend countries.
Well, that would be a nice segue to your Save the World project now, wouldn't it? Well done, girl.
Yeah, nice. We're all in agreement.
But we can demand a whole lot, but unless we change the way the industrial system is set up, where, for instance, the United States, I don't think there's any jurisdiction anywhere that isn't, where its economy isn't partly dependent on the defense industry, where so no politician of any stripe can dare to denounce it without losing his seat or her seat. So I think we need to really look very carefully on alternative manufacturing processes and so on. Just really just attack the military industrial complex at its very root.
No, that's another long-term project and one I'm very interested in, David. I call that disrupting the business model of war. And that's actually as you know, the framing for the workshop that we're going to hold at the World Beyond War Conference, that we just need to start even envisioning how that would be done. So some of it might be legislative, and it's correct that all 50 states have significant pork payoff from a $750 billion above board military budget. And then there's also the black budgets as well that feed those, as well as the bases all around the world. And so finding a way to shift away from the war economy, finding replacements in manufacturing. And this is where I think, to point out another area of drawdown that I think we can really work on, especially in our kind of Toronto community, because we have one of the other groups that we have, that kind of a sister group of the Unified Toronto, is the Systems Thinking Ontario. And one of the things that we might actually do is to start to take on some analysis and synthesis of the different systems that interrelate that together, that need to be dealt with for the leverage, the best leverage in the system to deal with some of these issues. So if we
Peter, I want you to tell me more about
and not just one at a time. And so that, Peter, I agree with you.
Peter, I have not, I'm thinking very much along the lines of systems, but I don't know much about it. So what you have just mentioned is something that I want you, let's have a phone conversation, because I want to know more about exactly what you're proposing there. Sounds fabulous. Yeah. Okay.
Well, this is another thing in drawdown that I think we can deal with at a larger scale, but at a smaller scale, to me, what would be meaningful from a systems approach are actually very, so people that, so I'm sure Liz and I know David have background in permaculture, and we can actually look either and with both an Indigenous and a permaculture lens on a lot of these solutions and start connecting them in the ways that we live and in our communities. So I don't look at the sectors and the solutions as being separate projects. And I'm a little wary of having people kind of looking at sector by sector, because I think the most creative and interesting, the most fun as well, kind of approaches will come out of connecting the different opportunities for change that emerge in our own communities. So like food waste in our own institutions, or developing, type of permaculture gardening within the city and urban agriculture with alternative energy, creating, both renewables and changes to food sourcing, creating whole new conversations within our communities and our practices, like the way that food co-ops emerged in the 1970s and 80s. We can be doing this with alternative energy and permaculture and local solutions that are intimately connected with the ways that our local communities are, with the kind of problems and issues. So, affordable housing and food supply and providing local parks could all come together, in our small towns and our suburbs.
Yeah.
That's looking at how several different problems intersect and how
absolutely
they by solving one of them, you're also working on solving the others. that's the whole notion behind our project, Save the World, which is the kind of the extension of the forum that we held about 6 weeks ago to come up with this platform for survival. And by the way, Liz is contributing a lot. She's going to be contributing a lot when we get this thing going really well. But Liz is going to be kind of a monitor or a moderator for a discussion group on global warming, which everybody can now go begin to contribute to. If you go to the website for Project Save the World, you can see a place where every one of the 6 global threats that we collectively address, that is war and weapons, mostly nuclear, global warming, which is what we've been dealing with tonight, but famine, pandemics, major radiation exposure from something like a reactor explosion, and cyber attacks. All of those things are interrelated, but they each have a separate page where there will be a discussion going on about each of them separately, but then we have a place with the intersection of how they're related. And it's wonderful. You have this little box with numbers. It's like a matrix, and you click, you put your cursor over one, and it shows you how these two things are related. So every one of these 6 global threats is actually causally related to every one of the others to some extent. They're all interrelated. And Liz is going to be monitoring the discussion of global warming on that page or the website.
Fabulous, Liz.
Too. So I hope everybody will start checking the website. It's called tosavetheworld.ca, and you can express yourself about what you've heard tonight. Do you have an opinion about what these folks have shared with you? And if so, do you have anything to add? Do you have new discoveries that you've come across in the newspaper or on Facebook or Twitter or something? Have you found something that shakes the foundations of all of this research that we've been discussing? Or do you have ideas about how to encourage people more to get behind the whole thing? I loved, there's a wonderful video of Paul Hawken, and my goodness, he's encouraging, because he does have this expression, you know, is it game over? No, it's game on. And it makes you feel, yeah, you know, this gives your life some meaning. You know, you've got something really important to do. You got to save the world. Mm-hmm. And what's better than that? And what's more exciting and positive and fun than that? I want to thank you guys. We could go on all evening, and in fact, several more days talking this way, I'm sure. Do you have anything you'd like to add before we sign off? We have a couple of minutes that we can wind up with here.
Oh, just to add to your point that you just made about the website, the idea that came from the 25 policies that were put together from the conference. Maybe you just want to mention that a little bit more.
Yes. Well, what we did is we decided that we wanted to put together a list of the most effective 25 public policies that, if they were all enacted and fulfilled, would actually solve, or at least greatly reduce, the risk of all 6 of these global threats. And so we have 6 policies for global warming, because that's really top, very important issue now. 6 policies on the list from dealing with war and weapons and, you know, especially nuclear, but others as well. 2 policies for each: famine, pandemics, radiation exposure, and cyber attacks. And another 5 policies that have to do with what I call enabling measures. That is, things that you need to do in order to make the others possible, like where you're going to get the money, or how are you going to, what kind of institution do you need to build to create, to enact the policies that you've promoted and so on. So we wanted people to propose these, ordinary people, everybody, every kind of person, to propose some effective measure. And then we would listen to experts give their opinions about it. And then we'd have breakout groups that would discuss it and come up with a list of these 25, which will fit on one piece of paper, because every policy is only limited to about 15 words. And it fit on one sheet of paper. We could go around the world and hand these out and say, do the 25 things on this one sheet of paper, and we got a good chance of saving the world. So that's what we're doing. And it's going to be a while before we actually start handing this out in a big scale, because we need to have the fuller explanation online. I mean, the short 15 words gives you the basic idea, but to really elaborate it, what I decided to do was try to take a lesson from the Paul Hawken experience, get some experts together to each write an extra several pages, maybe 2 or 3 pages, each one of these platform proposals, planks, I call them. And then put that all online so people can check and see, why do we think that refrigeration is important? Or why do we think that food waste is important? And how important is it compared to something else that might be done? So anyway, thanks, Liz, for giving me the cue to explain this. And I'm really grateful to you all, and to Liz, who's going to monitor the discussions that all of you folks out there are going to write on the website starting tomorrow morning. Okay?
Thank you, Metta. I think Paul Hawken would be very pleased that you used his model as your own model for your project. So what I would really like to see is having him come to Toronto and speak to us as a group. So if we ever organize that through Drawdown, we'll make sure you're invited to meet him. Okay?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you guys so much.
Thanks. Nice to chat, everybody.
Everybody check again next week. I'm not going to tell you what it's going to be yet.
Okay.
Hey. Good night.
Good night.
Take care, everybody.
All right, bye.
Good night now.
Good night.